The morning sunlight spilled across the towering glass walls of the office building, turning steel and glass into a canvas of fire and brilliance. The corporate plaza below pulsed with energy as men and women in sharp suits hurried past one another, juggling briefcases, coffee cups, and buzzing phones, their conversations clipped and rushed as though the very world could not afford to wait for them. In the midst of this constant rush, standing on the far edge of the polished stone courtyard, was a man who seemed entirely out of place. Dressed in a navy blue janitor's uniform, his posture steady but his eyes tired, Daniel stood quietly, watching the crowd with a weariness that came not from his job but from the life he carried on his shoulders. To passers-by, he was just another maintenance worker, broom in hand and silence in his step. But within him lived the weight of struggles no one saw, the unseen storms of responsibility, and the unrelenting ache of raising a child alone. Daniel was not just a janitor, he was a father, and to his little daughter Lily, he was the entire world. For 2 years he had been both mother and father, ever since tragedy had stolen his wife from their lives, leaving him to stitch together a home for Lily with little more than love, sacrifice, and grit. Every day he reported to this skyscraper, scrubbing its floors, wiping down its glass, changing its trash bins, doing invisible work that kept the building shining for people who never even looked at him. But for Daniel, each mop stroke and bag of garbage carried meaning, because it wasn't just about the job. It was about survival, about providing for Lily, about ensuring she never went without the little things that made her smile. Beneath his uniform, he carried more than cleaning rags. He carried hope, grief, and the unspoken promise that somehow he would give his daughter a better life. And yet, as ordinary as this morning seemed, with its sunlight and bustle and his quiet labor, Daniel could not have known how quickly everything was about to change. In just one heartbeat, in a single sharp breath, his voice would break through the noise of the plaza with a desperate shout. "Don't get in the car!" Those words, hurled with urgency, would unravel the rhythm of countless lives. In that moment, the janitor no one saw would suddenly become a man no one could ignore. The day had begun as most did, in the shadows of his small rented apartment on the quieter side of the city. His alarm buzzed at 5 o'clock, though more often than not, Daniel was already awake, lying still beneath the cracked ceiling with thoughts heavy in his chest. Beside him, bundled beneath a faded blanket, slept Lily, her tiny body curled protectively around a stuffed rabbit that was more stitches than fabric by now. He would watch her in those still moments, whispering promises he was never sure he could keep, promises that her life would be brighter than his, that he would fight to protect her dreams, that somehow, some way, he would keep her smiling. Then, moving quietly so as not to wake her, he prepared breakfast: toast browned unevenly, an egg fried on an old pan, and a glass of milk that he'd bought with coins carefully counted the night before. Her lunchbox was packed with the same care, not with riches but with love, and always, without fail, a small folded note with a smiley face to remind her that she was never alone in this world. By 6:30, Daniel was already at the gleaming tower where he worked, slipping into the rhythm of invisibility. The employees rushed past, their conversations sharp, their shoes clicking on marble floors polished to perfection. None of them saw him. To them, he was a shadow, just a man with keys on his belt and trash bags in his hands, blending into the background of their more important lives. But Daniel saw them. He had learned to notice the things others ignored: the stain hidden beneath a rug, the window with a hairline crack, the light bulb that flickered faintly above the stairwell. He noticed the people, too, their hurried footsteps, their clenched jaws, their nervous glances. He even saw the things they tried to hide, the quiet victories when they thought no one was looking, and the silent breakdowns in the bathroom stalls when they thought no one could hear. Daniel carried these unnoticed fragments with him, just as he carried the memory of his wife, silent and constant, a part of him no one else could ever see. It was just after 8 o'clock when the air around the building shifted. A sleek black car pulled up to the curb, and out stepped Catherine Hale, the CEO herself. She was a woman in her early 30s, as polished and formidable as the glass tower she commanded. Her rise to power had been meteoric, a story told in whispers of brilliance, drive, and perhaps a touch of ruthlessness. She walked with the confidence of someone who belonged to a different world than Daniel's, her heels striking the pavement like a metronome of authority. The crowd seemed to part for her naturally, the way waves bend around a rock, and yet, in that moment, Daniel's sharp eyes caught something no one else saw, something that made his pulse quicken, something that would soon demand his voice, his courage, and the very core of who he was. Catherine Hale moved with an energy that seemed to command the very air around her. Sharp, precise, and endlessly self-assured, she was a woman who had climbed through a ruthless world and emerged not just standing, but ruling. Her eyes rarely softened, carrying instead a constant edge of focus, as though every second wasted was a second lost in battle. Her heels struck the marble floors with the rhythm of authority, each click echoing like a metronome of power, reminding everyone who heard it exactly where she stood in the hierarchy of this glittering tower. To most, Catherine was untouchable, a figure sculpted out of ambition and success, the embodiment of everything the corporate world demanded and admired. To Daniel, however, she was simply another person he swept up after, another life orbiting a world that was galaxies away from his own. Still, in the private corners of his thoughts, he respected her. It wasn't envy, nor was it fantasy. It was something quieter, a recognition of her sheer will, the kind of strength that he, too, had been forced to summon in his own way, though his battleground was not boardrooms and profit margins, but survival, rent, and the fragile hope of a child's smile. Their paths rarely crossed, and Daniel expected that would never change. To her, he was invisible. To him, she was unreachable. Or at least, that's what he believed, until the moment came when their worlds collided with the weight of life and death. Later that morning, as Catherine stepped out of the building toward her sleek black car waiting at the curb, Daniel's gaze, as it always did, drifted toward the details. His instincts had been his compass for years, guiding him through hardships, through grief, through the lonely, unrelenting task of raising Lily on his own. Those instincts had never failed him, and now, in the glare of the sunlit plaza, they screamed. Something was wrong. At first glance, everything looked ordinary. The car gleamed in polished black, its chrome edges catching the sunlight in sharp reflections. Catherine's posture was poised, her stride confident, the crowd's eyes following her every move as though she were a queen descending to her throne. But Daniel's eyes saw more than surface. They always had. And now they caught what no one else noticed, a faint wire slipping from beneath the driver's side door, so small, so easy to miss, almost hidden in the shadows where light didn't dare fall. His stomach tightened. His gaze shifted to the man behind the wheel. He wasn't the usual driver, not the steady chauffeur Daniel had seen countless times before. This man was different. His posture was stiff, his knuckles pale against the steering wheel, his eyes flickering with an unease he could not mask. It wasn't ordinary nervousness. It was fear, or guilt, or something far darker. A chill ran through Daniel's spine as 1,000 fragmented images rushed through his mind, news reports about corporate vendettas, stories of sabotage, acts of revenge that had spilled blood in the name of power. He had seen enough late-night crime shows to recognize the signs, enough headlines to know the world was capable of horrors disguised as routine. And now, standing only a few yards away, he realized this was one of those moments when seconds would matter more than years. This wasn't coincidence. This wasn't a mistake. This was danger, waiting to swallow Catherine whole the moment she opened that car door. His heart thundered in his chest, each beat like a hammer against his ribs. Fear coiled in his throat, threatening to choke him into silence, but courage, born not of training or power but of necessity, forced his body forward. The broom in his hand slipped to the ground, clattering against the stone courtyard, forgotten in the urgency of what he had seen. His boots pounded against the pavement as he broke into a run, his breath cutting sharp through the air. And then his voice rose, raw and unpolished, tearing through the polished calm of the morning like a siren. "Don't get in the car!" The sound cracked the rhythm of the plaza. Catherine froze mid-step, her polished composure suddenly shattered. Conversations cut off. Executives halted in confusion, their briefcases dangling uselessly at their sides. Security guards snapped their heads around, startled and uncertain. The entire courtyard seemed to hold its breath, suspended in the moment between disbelief and realization. For the crowd, it was incomprehensible. Who was this janitor to shout at their CO? What right did a man in a uniform stained with labor have to call out to the untouchable leader of their empire? But Daniel's arm was raised, his expression carved in desperation, his voice vibrating with urgency. He was not a worker then. He was not invisible. He was a father, a man who had lived on instinct and survival, and now those instincts demanded to be heard. Seconds later, Catherine understood why the janitor's voice had cut through the morning like a blade. Her hand, elegant and steady only moments before, now hovered above the car handle as a faint, metallic click broke the air. It was a sound so small it might have been dismissed as the settling of an engine, or the creak of metal in the sun. But in the silence that followed Daniel's desperate shout, the noise rang out like a warning bell. Catherine froze, her pulse crashing through her chest as a ripple of dread spread over her. Her sharp composure faltered, replaced by something she rarely allowed herself to feel: fear. The driver's face told the rest of the story. His rigid posture collapsed into panic, his eyes darting wildly as his trembling fingers scrambled near the dashboard, fumbling with buttons and wires. The stillness of the plaza shattered. Security guards surged forward in a blur of motion, their training colliding with the chaos that erupted all at once. Executives stumbled back, voices rising in confusion, their polished calm unraveling into panic. One guard seized Catherine by the arm, pulling her away from the car, while another spread his body as a shield. Daniel, no longer the invisible janitor in the background, had thrown himself into the storm. He lunged forward, pointing with trembling certainty at the wire he had seen moments before, his voice breaking through the noise. "There's something there!" His words struck with undeniable force, and the guards dropped low, crawling to the undercarriage where shadows hid secrets too dangerous to ignore. The truth revealed itself in a heartbeat that seemed to stretch into eternity. Rigged beneath the CO's sleek black car was a device crude in design, but devastating in potential: a bomb. Wires tangled together, taped and coiled with a deadly purpose, waiting for the slightest trigger. The realization hit like a wave of fire. Had Catherine opened the door, had she taken one step closer, had Daniel's voice not cut through the air when it did, everything would have ended in an explosion of steel and flame, shattering glass and tearing lives apart. Catherine's life, the empire she had built, the future of the company, all of it balanced on the razor's edge of that one ordinary morning. And it had been saved not by executives in tailored suits, not by armed security, not by polished board members with titles and power. It had been saved by a man no one noticed, a man with weary eyes and calloused hands who carried the weight of 2 lives on his shoulders. On that bright morning, when fear and fire nearly claimed everything, it was Daniel, the single father, the janitor, the man the world overlooked, who shouted the words that shifted fate. Catherine's life was spared. The company was spared. And something far greater was revealed, the truth about loyalty and courage, about how heroism does not always wear a suit or a badge. Sometimes it wears a faded uniform stained with soap, sometimes it holds a mop or a broom instead of a weapon, and sometimes it moves not for glory but for love, the love of a little girl waiting at home, dreaming of a future her father had vowed to protect.